The basic pattern pieces are like a puzzle, and they fit together in a certain way and fit a certain dress form or a certain person. And the dress forms, there are no two that are identical, just like no two people are identical. So this dress form is labeled to fit form number 13. It's a size 8, and it's a small half-scale dress form. So we'll be learning all of the same things that you would learn on a full-scale body, but we'll be doing it with half as much paper. And so it goes a little faster, but you still learn the same concepts. So if you're one of the people that was having a hard time with the format of printing on canvas, I will make sure that I take care of that. The only one that you'll need for the first 2 weeks of class will be the single dart bodice front sloper. So if you can only get one out, this is the one that I would get out. So these are my originals. There's a video, probably 2 videos each, on how the pattern was draped and then how the pattern was made and trued and balanced, that you'll want to watch, and I'll assign those for a certain specific week. This one, I'll double check and make sure. And I've got a fan below it, the ceiling fan, and things just are moving around a little bit. Okay, so this pattern was traced off of this one. I actually made I printed myself one out of canvas and cut it out, and I traced it on for this one. And these 3 are all the same pattern with slight differences. This one is the original. This one is another version of the original, where, excuse me, no, it isn't. It is not a version of that original, so I will take it away from that set. But this one is a version of this pattern that has 2 darts instead of 1. So we're making the 2 darted pattern out of the 1 darted pattern, and we'll get to that next week. I will also show you how to drape a 2 darted pattern, because sometimes that comes in really handy when you're making a princess line. You can pre-plan the dart to match the skirt exactly. All right. There are also patterns in some of the books, and I should show you the book. Well, there's a link to it in the syllabus. But the black and white one, well, it's white with black and brown on the cover, has pattern pieces in it that you can use. No, the blue one does. The blue one's the more expensive one. And the white one with black and brown printing is less expensive, has all of the same information in it, but not the pattern pieces. So you'll plot these out and print these out and use them. These fit the dress form, the ones in the book do not. So when I want to use this pattern piece, you can use it either direction. I'm going to trace this off onto another piece of paper, and that's usually where we get started. And instead of using that nice little pencil, I don't think people can see it as well. So I'm actually going to trace this with a fat marker, so it's easier to see. Yep, that shows up a lot better from where I'm sitting. So you'll trace it off first. And when you're tracing off patterns, that can be done on the computer, but people don't always have access to a computer. And they work just as well on paper. So when I trace that off, I have a really fat line. And even if it wasn't a really fat line, one of the things I like to explain is that when you're looking at the circumference of a waistline, say, and if this is the center front, and this is the center back, and this is the side seam, the two side seams, maybe you don't have a seam down the center back, or you don't have a seam down the center front, but you'll have a seam on this side and this side. So the seam here, you'll have two sides of the pattern. If I have added a little bit in the line width and I cut this out on the outside of the line instead of the inside of the line, this is, the line I drew with this is about 1/16 of an inch wide. The line that I would draw with my pencil is maybe 1/32 of an inch wide. If I leave that line on every time I cut this piece out, then the circumference of that waistline will grow. And in this example, it would be 1/16, two more 1/16, so we're up to 1/8, 1/4, and 3/8 of an inch. So if the pattern grows by 3/8 of an inch, it's almost as big as the next size up. And if you do that once or twice a season when you're working in a company, your pieces are going to turn out to be too big. And there's an amount of tolerance that we allow in the factory, but it doesn't usually exceed 1/2 inch. So you always have to cut the line off when you're cutting the pattern out. And the way to do that, when I'm cutting this pattern out, I want to carefully cut clockwise so that I can see the line. I don't want to be cutting the other way, because if I cut this way, I can see the line. Now if you're left-handed, using left-handed scissors, this is the opposite of that. But I've cut the line off. It had a little bit of bleed through, but I cut the line off so that the pattern doesn't grow. And if I continue the rest of the way around, going clockwise so I can see my cut, I can carefully cut out the whole thing nice and neat, and it ends up to be the exact same size and shape as the original. Where if I did it the other way, or I was sloppy, it would be different. Okay. Now, while you're starting out, you might not be very steady-handed at cutting. So if you would like to cut counterclockwise and just barely leave the line on, and always start from the original, then you'll be able to see your cutting improve, and that will be fine with me. Just continue to improve and always start from your original one that's a single size, rather than perpetually getting it bigger every time. So this one has the line on, and if you need to practice that, that's a good way to tell whether you're improving. So as I cut this out, if you're feeling more confident, I'm going to keep just going clockwise, and I'm taking long scissor strokes. I'm not doing little cuts. I'm not using little scissors. I'm using scissors that I can make nice long cuts with. Often students will have a hard time cutting and maybe be shaky. Students that have issues with that, I usually tell them to put both hands on the table so that their hands are anchored and touching the table. And if they're touching the table, then there's no shakiness, and you can feed the paper into the scissors with your other hand, and it keeps it nice and stable. So that's something that you'll be practicing. Another thing that you'll notice that I do, sometimes I don't keep both of my hands on the desk, but I treat this like I'm making pottery on a pottery wheel. And if you've ever done that, when you're shaping the pottery, you have to anchor your hands so they work together as one, and it helps you not shake. The other thing that I'm doing is I have my elbows anchored against the table or against my side so that I don't move while I cut. And I do that without thinking now, but it's a good habit. So I am holding the scissors with the back of my hand. So my left hand is up in the air slightly, but the scissors are touching my hand and my elbow is on the table, so I am fully bracing myself while I'm cutting. Little things make a huge difference. Okay, that one's going to be a little harder to do clockwise. So I have just about cut out my first front. So when this video ends, make sure that you've got your pieces printed out, or at least your front, and cut one of them out so that you can use it to do your homework with. And then save that one somewhere so that it's always available to use. Okay, there it is. I have some heavier paper right here. Sometimes it's helpful if you get the heavier cardstock and go ahead and cut out the whole group of 5 pattern pieces. That's called a sloper. Your sloper front and back. But a sloper altogether are the pieces that fit a certain body or a certain company measurement. That's why we're brand loyal, is because the company that we like to buy from always maintains a certain fit. So if you want to, once you've practiced cutting a little bit, you can just line that up on the edge and not have to cut that long straight line and trace it off, and cut out all of your pieces so they're easier to trace around. That is optional. I will never know if you did or didn't, but it will be easier for you. Okay, so as my background paper, I happen to have lavender, and I like that. And when I finish, I'm going to put my pattern piece, not this one, we're going to make changes to it. I'm going to put my pattern piece on there, and I'm going to put one little glue spot on it so it stays anchored in position. And you'll have your little drawing. And when you're through, you'll have the drawing that already exists. And on the drawing, there will be 2 bust points. And this particular one comes up from the waist. So to finish it, you're going to draw the line up to, but not touching, the bust point. And then you'll know that this is what this looks like when it's sewn together, and you'll glue that down in the corner. And that's how you'll turn them in. But you'll also need to label them. There should be a page on labeling. So you'll put your name on there. This is where the style number would go if you're working at a company or you want to name your pattern. But put your name on it. And this is the bodice front. Cut 1 on the fold. If you put a seam allowance down the center front, then it won't be cut 1 on the fold, it would be cut 2, and you would have to have a line down the center front. So unless you're planning to put a line down the center front, this needs to be labeled as on the fold. And there are instructions on canvas for that. Can you even see that? So from there you'd add seam allowance, and when you get the seam allowance on there, then you can glue it down and put it in your notebook. Before that, you'll want to take this and scan it. If you don't have access to a scanner, you can take a photograph, but please take it straight on so it's not crooked. And there's a place for you to upload those on Canvas. So that was how to cut, label, and get things ready to turn in. The next one, we'll rotate a dart and add seam allowance.